Hello and welcome. We are once again live inside the lab on this Saturday, 11:30. Sorry about the slight delay. Once again, tell me where you're watching from. I see we have a couple of viewers there joining us this Saturday. Tell me what's going on in your neck of the woods or where you are located, weather and all. Again, so today the purpose of this live stream is to discuss the pros and cons to buying a pre-built gaming PC, specifically online. At least that is the approach we're going to take today. You likely do have local options near wherever you are located in the world, whether that be from a major retail chain like Best Buy or Micro Center, what have you, or an independent business owner that specializes in doing custom builds. Whatever the case may be, today's live stream is to give you a general idea of what you could expect to pay if you wanted to go the alternative route, and that is to building your gaming PC. It's what I recommend here on the channel is that you build your own gaming PC, as you can save a little bit of money doing it that way, and you have more freedom range as far as the parts you choose, as we'll go over that in further detail or further discussion. And again, also the purpose of this live stream, if you're just coming in or when you come into the live stream, is please bring your questions. I'm open to answering any questions, whether that be you're having problems with your PC, or you have questions along the live stream. If it's something personal you want to ask me, I'll do my best to give you an answer, and we'll answer that question for you. So again, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what's going on in your neck of the woods, and we're going to jump right into it and transition over into our training scene. Now, we're going to start with a budget oriented option. Of course, that's one of the things we live by here on the channel is, you know, budget. We want you to get the best bang for your buck. But when you're going pre-built, when you're buying a pre-built or you're going the pre-built direction, that could be a little tricky. I answer questions in the chat all the time from the community, and they want to know, well, I have, say, X amount of budget, like we did in last Saturday's live stream, where we configured the $600 gaming PC that could stream and game, definitely at 720p high settings with no problems, and possibly 1080p about low settings, no problems. But they say, well, I want to build a gaming PC that's going to cost about $600. And if you want to go a pre-built, the problem is you're going to pay more for the overhead, the cost for them to pay somebody to build the PC, the cost that, I mean, it's a business, they want to make money. The profit margins aren't as high for these sellers when they're selling a pre-built gaming PC. RT Gaming with the first question says, is a Ryzen 3 better than a Intel Core i5? That depends. Which generation Core i5 are you referring to? Is it the 6 core, 6 thread Core i5, 86 or 8th gen Coffee Lake? I would say they're probably very close, but the problem is Ryzen 3, which we'll see here in one of these pre-builds, they're 4 cores, 8 threads. So if you're going with a 4 core, 4 threads uh, Intel CPU, depending on the game you're playing, you may benefit from SMT, or simultaneously multi-threading, on AMD side, better known as hyper-threading on Intel side. But the Core 10th generation just introduced hyper-threading on the lower end Core i5s and Core i3s. So he says 8th gen. That's going to be very close. I would still say, because Intel is king at IPC. Camera's a little out of focus there. Whoa, sorry about that. Gonna a second. Up there we go. Okay. So given that Intel is still king at IPC, you are going to see slightly better frames, depending on the game, RT. But again, it really depends on the game, because clock speed and when coupled with IPC, can really give you solid gains. But within margin, they'll be very close. But the problem is that Core i5 8th gen is going to cost more than that Ryzen 3, and plus you'll have better upgrade options on AM4 as opposed to 8th gen. You're limited to what, the 8700K. All right, so but that's a good question, RT Gaming, and we're going to jump right back into our training scene, and because the first PC that we're looking at is or does have a Ryzen 3 inside of it, right? It's by Skytech, likely just the name of the brand, as you can see here, Skytech Gaming. I mean, that's just the name of the brand that sells the PC, right? Um, but more specifically, looking at the price, $649. That's for a Ryzen 3. Let's look at the specs really fast. It's for a Ryzen 3, 3100. So it's a Zen 2 CPU. So the latest Ryzen family of CPUs. Base frequency of 3.6 gigahertz, max turbo of 3.9 gigahertz. That seems to be well. That seems to be within margin of all of the first Ryzen CPUs. Most of them can't really go past 4 gigahertz unless you're running, say, a 3700X or a 3800X. The way AMD spreads the load to get high clock speeds is really tricky, and it also really depends on the load as well, on the CPU load. But still, very much a 4-core, 8-thread CPU. So it has hyperthreading, right? A320 motherboard, so it's the budget of budget motherboards for AM4. But don't sleep on the A320 motherboards. I am going to do a video on the upcoming series of motherboards because there is some incredible value. If you don't want to go B450 or B550, you can go A320. But the problem here is the price with this system. It has a 1650 Super, 4 gigabyte. So if you've been around here on the channel, which if you're not and you're a first time viewer, let me know in the chat. Welcome. But as we in the latest video, we just benchmarked the 1650 Super. It's a $189 graphics card, or I paid $189 for the graphics card. Here, it's out of stock on Amazon, and it's still going for the price just went up, so it's hovering around $200. But you have the Ryzen 3 3100 and the 1650 Super, 500 gigabyte SSD, and some pretty slick RGB. But this is about $100 more than the system we built, or what you can build with, say, a Ryzen 5 2600. So you can have a 6-core, 12-thread CPU as opposed to 4 cores and 8 threads. But if you're only gaming, 4 cores, 8 threads is going to be more than enough, right? It's going to be more than enough. Zen 2 Ryzen 3 IPC is really good, really, really good price to performance for the money. And you can stream on it, but I highly recommend you stream at 720p or you encode on the GPU then. I mean, you might struggle to get 60 FPS, but if you tweak the settings and depending on the game, you definitely can achieve that. 1650 Super put up fantastic numbers in, say, Fortnite, Call of Duty Warzone, Apex Legends, and those are all at competitive settings. It also has a Wi-Fi adapter, which is pretty interesting. As most, I mean, you want to go wired. I said this in a video before. You want to go wired whenever possible. You want to go with a wired connection for your gaming sessions, and especially when you're streaming, you're going to get better download times, um, reduced amount of lag, and all those good things. So yeah, I mean the case looks good. It has an open panel right here. So ideally and theoretically, you're going to get good airflow flowing through your components right here. And something else to point out, just because this is what you see here in your pictures when you're buying a pre-built, it's important to read read the fine lines, because somewhere along the lines here it tells you the parts may vary. Some of these pre-builds I saw, they tell you that what you see in the picture may not be what you get in your final system. Some of the pre-builds you can choose specifically, obviously the CPU, but when it comes down to say the brand of the GPU or the brand of the motherboard, that will vary on what the manufacturer will send to you. All right. It says now it does say it can run. It says powerful gaming PC. Well, the GPU helped it kind of maintain that stigma. Running your favorite games such as World of Warcraft, this PC will have no problems running World of Warcraft, LOL, GTA 5, Apex Legends, Fortnite, Roblox, Players Unknown Battlegrounds, all these games. Now, where I'm concerned at, it says 1440p quad HD resolution and smooth 60 FPS gameplay. That's debatable. Okay, that is heavily debatable. That's something we can also test because I have the 1650 Super still here in the lab. And spoiler alert, we can test at this 1440p quad HD resolution. And most of these games we can test too because I find the 60 FPS smooth gameplay very questionable. Very questionable. So, but again, not a bad option. Not a bad option. $649. Again, it costs this much because of the overhead. If you parted this system out separately, right? If you parted this system out, you would likely be somewhere under five, about $500 to $550. So that's something to consider. What I recommended last week on the live stream to one of the viewers, what I recommended last week is that you try to account for that extra amount in your budget. So if you have $800 to spend on a pre-built, you really want to shop somewhere in between the $600 to $700 range in terms of specs because what you're going to get for a system that's going to cost about $600 to $700 after the overhead cost absorbed by you, the consumer, or by us, the consumer, after that overhead price is absorbed, it after that overhead price is absorbed, it inflates the price. It makes the price go up. RT Gaming says, do you recommend pre-builds or custom builds if your price range is $650? Excellent question. Here's what I would say. If if you're comfortable with building, this is what I always recommend. If you're comfortable with building, I say build and definitely build because you're going to save money. With a budget of $650, you are going to be able to build a better system if you pick the parts out and you build it yourself. But if you're uncomfortable with building, which is perfectly fine, if you're uncomfortable with building RT Gaming, then I recommend you go with a pre-build in that price range because even if you're uncomfortable building now, you could always save up and upgrade and make the changes you want to make down the road. Say if you want to upgrade the GPU, that's not really a hard upgrade switch, right? You unplug the connectors, unplug the two screws that keeps the GPU vertical, and put the new and install your new GPU. CPU can get a little tricky, right? It takes a whole different comfort level, but you can also upgrade your CPU down the road. So you can start with, say, a 649 pre-build and upgrade it down the road. Hope that answers your question, RT. But I mean, excellent question. Keep them coming. I mean, oh, so sorry, excuse me. But at that price range, if you're comfortable with building, build. Pick your parts up. I can't recommend that enough. Build. You're going to want to build. You're going to save so much money doing it that way. So much money. But going pre-build is okay. But as you're going to see here in a couple more of these pre-builds, the price can go up and the performance you're going to expect is just not going to be there. It's just not going to be there. So, all right, I'll tell you what, let's jump right along. Let's move right along to the next pre-build because this one kind of goes up in price a little bit. And more specifically, I like pre-built. For one, I am a fan of the case, although it doesn't have what looks like, it doesn't look like it has good front airflow. Like it looked like there's right there on the left and right side of the front mesh, where it looks like a little bit of air can come through, and looks like there's a grill there. But I do like the aesthetics of this case, right? I mean, it's clean for a $749 system. But let's jump down and look at the specs once again. One of the things that stood out the most to me with this system is the 8 gigabytes of DDR4. Now, last week I recommended in our configuration video that you go with the system that's at least 16 gigabytes. 16 gigabytes is the standard. It should be the entry point. If you can, you should allocate money there before you really allocate money elsewhere, if that makes sense. I mean, put the money in the parts that are going to give you the biggest impact first, right? So if you have $800 to spend on a pre-built, right? Let's say you had $800 to spend on a pre-built. Here's an option for you. SkyTech once again. Wow, they're all over Amazon, right? SkyTech. You have a Ryzen 5 2600, so a 6 core. I personally am a huge fan of the Ryzen 5 lineup, right? I started on modern computing with a Ryzen 5 1600X. And I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of different CPUs here recently for both personal and work. But the Ryzen 5 2600 for its price is just an incredible 6 core 12 thread CPU. It's going to enable you to edit video, it's going to enable you to stream and game at the same time, right? It has incredible IPC for Zen Plus CPU. Um, and it's still overclockable. It's still overclockable. Maybe not on the A320 motherboard, but CPU is overclockable. The GTX 1660, 6 gigabyte, excellent graphics card. That's a great graphics card. One might say that the 1660 Super is the better option there, but you don't have that. You don't have the luxury of choice. And we will get there later in this live stream, as we'll have a bonus option down or at the end of this video. We'll have a bonus option, but you can't pick the graphics card you want. Obviously, in a pre-built, it's pre-built. It's already built and ready to be shipped to the seller. So we don't know which 1660 gigabyte, 1666 gigabyte. Wow, 1666 gigabyte. That is a lot of sixes, but we don't know which one it is. We don't know which more. What I mean by that is we don't know which AIB manufacturer it is. We don't know which add-in board maker it is. We don't know if it's MSI. We don't know if it's a reference 1660, which I don't think Nvidia may reference 1660s. I stand corrected, but we don't know which brand of which add-in board maker it is. 500 gigabyte SSD. Here's if you're going with a single solution storage, and we talked about this last week's configuration video, and I've also said this in multiple build videos we did here on the channel. Which all of the content that we talk about, you can find down in the basement. Once again, the basement is the description box. You can find all of the links to the videos discussed during this live stream down in the basement, right? Also, the affiliate links to some of these systems that we're talking about and going through here today. Now, going back to SkyTech's Blaze 2 gaming computer, it's not a bad system. Again, it has an A320 motherboard. Claims it can play some, 1080p, which ironically it doesn't make the bold claim of 1440p quad resolution, 60 plus FPS smooth gameplay like the other one was marketed. No, this just says 1080p high to ultra resolution with 60 plus FPS in Apex, Fortnite, and what have you. That seems a little bit more aligned with what you're going to get in this system. Even with the last one we looked at, that was 649. I can I can see 1080p, medium to high settings, 60 plus FPS in some of these same games here with this build, but 1440p quad. I mean, that takes the to power those extra pixels takes a beefy GPU, a slightly beefy GPU, especially at ultra settings. You're limited to 4 gigabytes of VRAM on the 1650 Super, and the higher the resolution, the more VRAM the graphics card needs to store the models, or not the models, I'm sorry, to store some of the graphic assets like textures and things like that. So moving along, you can upgrade to six. You can here in this ad, you can upgrade to an extra 8 gigabytes of DDR4 of memory, but the price goes up significantly when you do that. I mean, is it really worth the extra $149 for just an extra 8 gigabyte stick of RAM? That's tough. That's tough. Again, if you're uncomfortable with building, you're going to absorb most of that cost then. The cost to the cost of, well, let's say in this example, Skytech, the cost of Skytech to build the PC, get the parts, what have you, Windows, all of those things. They're going to pass that cost off to you because, as you can see here, going from, and I mean, you're also going up to a 1660 Super, nonetheless, but that's a heck of an upgrade because if you're building a $900 PC, you could go with the Zen 2 CPU. You'll definitely get more bang for your buck. Maybe even a 2060. You can upgrade to a 2060, maybe even a 2060 Super. So, but yeah, so looking at Skytech's, Ryzen 5 2600 system. I mean, again, the case has open airflow, a little bit of RGB if you're into it. I know it's not for everybody. If you be down with RGB, tell us down in the chat. If you're not, that's perfectly fine too. But if you like RGB in your system, tell me in the chat. Just hashtag RGB. I really like to know. But again, if not, I know it's not for everybody. I like basic systems too. Monochromatic systems, say like black and white or all black. Those systems look dope too. Me personally, I like RGB. Maybe not in this uh, vibrant color array, but I do like RGB, especially when you assign it to maybe a static light, right? Snow White, for example, my system that I do all of my editing on, everything, I have all white. So all of the RGB inside is set to just static white, hence the name Snow White. But I do like RGB. I am a fan of RGB. In some instances, you can let the rainbow, given, I mean, really, I heard a rumor that it's really only like that because the manufacturers want to display the color vibrancy and just kind of what you can expect from the overall light array. But it's okay with me. It's an extra bonus. No, it doesn't give you extra FPS, but it does help boost your PC's personality. But yeah, I mean, it has a side panel, which I'm curious. I mean, this hinge system is pretty interesting. I imagine. I mean, that's pretty cool. Look like it's like a black and white finish. So I mean, not a bad system, but you're going to pay $900. You have to ask yourself if you're, once again, if you're uncomfortable with building, then you go the route of excuse me, you go the route of buying a pre-built. You go the route of trying to find a system that, in all honesty, in my opinion, when you're buying a pre-built, right, you want to pick a system that has the fastest CPU possible, right? The fastest CPU possible. The Ryzen 5 2600, slightly faster than the 3100, depending on the game. If the game benefits from hyper-threading, then you're going to see a really good performance. You're going to see good performance out of that Ryzen 5. And they overclock well too. 2600 overclocks well. You can get it to 4.0 gigahertz, at least maybe 3.9, and that's even on air. Imagine what you could do on water. No, you can't go that much further, even on water. But 2600X, I've seen at 4.2, 4.1, 4.2. It takes some tweaking in the BIOS to achieve those numbers, especially if you're doing an all-core overclock. But we're not talking about overclock, not in this live stream. We'll save that for another live stream. But I mean, this system's not that bad. Rather, you would go with the 1660 8 gigabyte variant, and what I would recommend doing is just buy your own stick of RAM and installing it yourself. If once you find out what model and what brand the stick is and the timings and the speed, then you can maybe buy a matching RAM stick or even upgrade it to something, with better latency and better timings. That's always an option as well. So I kind of like this pre-built. If I had $800 to drop on a pre-built and I didn't want to buy, I'd be somewhere along this ballpark. It has most of the things you would want, minus the 8 gigabytes of DDR4 memory, right? You'd want at least 16. Windows is going to absorb a 1.5, 2 gigabytes of system RAM. So you'll really only maybe have 5.5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM to your disposal for your gaming sessions. Most games require at least 8 gigabytes of RAM, most of them, or four. So you are really walking a tight line there with 8 gigabytes, especially if you're going to have other applications running in the background. If you want to stream, almost forget about it. You have so many other programs running in the background. You want at least 16. Here recently, 32 is even becoming a standard for streaming games. So that's just something to consider. 749. But if you have at $749, but if you have an extra little bit of coin and you want to save up, but you don't want to wait to get a PC, like you say, I have the money and I want it, I want it now. I want to get the PC. I want to buy my PC now. I want to play some games. Buy your PC, upgrade, and make slow upgrades. You don't have to upgrade right away. Make slow upgrades, but you would want at least 16 gigabytes of RAM. You'd want at least 16 gigabytes of RAM. And on the subject of graphics cards, I do want to mention that Nvidia is releasing or is set to announce the RTX 3000 series graphics cards, or on the Ampere um, GPU. So here's what I expect to happen. I do expect those graphics cards to cost more. I saw a tweet that had the RTX 3090, I believe, at $1,400, so about $200 more than the 2080 Ti, I believe. How much more performance you can expect from that remains to be seen. But because we do talk a lot about used parts here, or how my friend or mate Brian over at TechX City kind of mentioned that as used PC parts enthusiasts, we kind of look at the used market and let the new market determine the direction of the used market. So if these cards are going to cost that much, and Nvidia did stop manufacturing the 2000 series, I mean they're still selling them. They just stopped manufacturing them. When gamers out there and PC enthusiasts who are going to want to upgrade to those latest and greatest GPUs, there's going to be a flood of used GPUs on the market. RTX 2080s and 2060s and 2070s could be abundant on the market. You still would get ray tracing if you're interested in RTX, which RTX is really. I played Metro Exodus, right? And I haven't played Control. I understand it was well implemented in Control, but I played Metro Exodus, and Metro Exodus had parts of the game that looked incredible with RTX enabled. And I played at the time on an RTX 2080 Ti because I wanted to play at RTX ultra settings, but the game still very much demanding, and I was playing on the 100 hertz panel, so I did want to kind of stay closer to my refresh rate. So I did have to turn down some of the settings, but even still, the game with its lighting and just how the environment was designed to interact with the lighting, and then RTX doing its thing in the background just created this incredible experience. Incredible experience. It was like really immersive and really some of the best graphics I've seen in a game since Resident Evil 7, maybe. But yeah. So, all right, moving right along. Let's go back to our trading scene and looking at the Skytech Blaze 2 gaming PC. It's 749. If you have that $800 disposable income to drop on a PC, you can go with a pre-built in this range or with similar specs. Another thing I would upgrade before we move to our next PC would be obviously the 8 gigabytes of RAM, and definitely, and maybe 500 gigabytes, depending on how many games you play and the types of games you play, may not really be enough. It's good to have Windows on an SSD, and definitely, and maybe some of your most favorite games you play. But you should also strongly consider at least and definitely adding a 1 terabyte mechanical spinner to this system. All right. Maybe just drop it down there in the basement of the PC, right there where the PSU is, or upgrade to a bigger SSD. But moving along. All right, so that's the $749 one. Let's kick it up a little bit. All right, we have an $829 one. This one, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this one. Again, it's another Skytech PC. It's slightly more because now it has a 1660 Ti. Same amount, 8 gigabytes of VRAM though. Is that enough? Not in my opinion. Not in my opinion. If you weren't gaming, and most of us here these days want to stream too, even if it's recreational or to your friends. Most of us want to stream too, and 8 just isn't enough. 8 isn't enough. CPU is great again. I speak of the Ryzen 5 2600. CPU is good enough. The GPU is good enough. But what you're paying, now we're over $800. The last bill was $749. Now we're over $800. And the only thing we've really changed here is the GPU. And it wasn't that big of an upgrade. We went from a 1660 Super to a 1660 Ti. So arguably the upgrade is null. The performance is it going to negate spending the extra, what, 80 bucks just about? I'm not great at math. It's okay to laugh, but I'm not great at math. But the upgrade isn't doesn't negate the cost. You can look down here. Whoa, okay. That's a little bit too much blue. Again, this isn't indicative of what you may receive from the manufacturer. Full disclaimer. But this is almost, I mean, it's unavailable for a reason. For starters, I mean, it has a GTX 1080. We're not even going to spend a lot of time on that. Going back to the 1660 Ti variant, $829. Why we wouldn't go with the GTX 1080? Well, the value isn't there. I see 10 GTX 1080 is going for 350, and at that point, you'd probably buy a 5700 XT. I really will have respect for GTX 1080 once we see them sub $300, maybe even sub 200. Be a dream. 250, and it's a great graphics card. I owned a GTX 1080 for a while. You could see it maybe up there on the shelves, but somewhere up there, right there, yeah, right there. That was that was my first Pascal card that I owned was the GTX 1080, and it was a great card. But moving along, back to this system here, $829. You could very much still do well if or do better if you had $800 to spend and you couldn't go over. Again, you want to kind of shop for a build that's a little under how much you can spend. So if you had 800, you're better off going with the $749 build. Oh, okay. Now, if the 16 Super variant was 900, so I stand corrected. But the 1660 6 gigabyte from a 1660 Ti is 749. So you would have $50 to save in pocket for future upgrades or to upgrade your RAM, right? Because a single stick of memory is what, 30 bucks, 40 bucks, depending on the type and the manufacturer, but it wouldn't cost you that much. So once again, if you're at $800, you're better off going here. Don't go over. Chances are they're going to upsell you as to just to get that extra 8 GB of memory and the super variant of the 1660. It's a $149 upgrade, and that's just going to lead you to say, well, now I have to save up more money. Now I have to save up more. Now I can't get my gaming PC. Now I have to wait. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. If you only have 800 to spend, go with this system that is similarly close to the one you can't afford. In this case, we would look at say, well, I only have 800. This one costs $899, $900. What more am I getting? An extra 8 GB of RAM? I can add that myself. A 1660 Super? Maybe I don't need the extra frames. I only want to game at 1080p, 60 FPS, 60 hertz. So this, in my opinion, this build is still better than our 829 option. There's not that big of an upgrade, and even still, you're getting the fastest CPU. But speaking of fastest CPU, let's look at an Intel variant. Because Amazon tells me this is a bestseller. This is a bestseller. Intel still very much the king of IPC. Still arguably make the fastest CPU for gaming, and you're going to pay for that. This is a iBuy Power PC. They're pretty reputable, right? Pretty sure you heard of them. But this is an iPower PC, and they're not sponsoring. They're not sponsors of the channel or this video. This is an iPower PC. It has an i7, ninth gen i7, 9700F. So that's an 8 core, no hyper-threading. So it's 8 core, 8 threads. The F means that it doesn't have integrated graphics, so you couldn't say troubleshoot any system issues you would have or system problems you'd run into if you didn't have a graphics card. Because you can on Intel CPUs, you can they have integrated graphics, but not the F variants. They don't, and this isn't overclockable either. So the it's the base of base when it comes to ninth gen. But let's look at some more of the specs because this one's $900. It's significantly more than your $749 one we looked at. Significantly more. 1660 Ti, so you're getting a slight bump in the upgrade in the GPU department. Slightly faster GPU. Still 6 GB of VRAM. So if you're playing, if your goal is GTX, I'm sorry, if your aim is 1920 by 1080p, and you really don't expect to go any higher to say like 1440p, no time soon, 6 GB is going to be more than enough. It's going to be more than enough. You also get 16 gigabytes of RAM. You should expect that from a pre-built PC that's just teetering over $1,000. And you can see here, this pre-built went with a 2 storage solution. This goes back to what I mentioned at the last pre-built that we were looking at, where it only had a 500 gigabyte SSD. That was it. Whereas I recommend that you go with a 240, right? Maybe even M.2 for faster boot times, overall faster system responsiveness. But you go with at least a 240 for your OS, so for Windows, and maybe one or two of your core games, the games you fire up and you play the most. Here recently, if I saw correctly, Fortnite was somewhere over 100 gigabytes. Call of Duty Warzone over 100 gigabytes. I mean, these games are getting bigger and bigger. They're getting larger and larger in terms of file size. So that 1 terabyte HD spinner, a mechanical drive, is going to give you some redundant, storage to say, well, I don't play X game as much, but maybe I do just want to have it there to fire it up. I mean, they're not terribly slow. right? They're not terribly slow. Still very much worth it to have one in your system. I have two of them in Snow White, two 2 terabyte HD mechanical spinners in Snow White. So they're very much still good to have in your system. You don't get extra performance from putting your game on an SSD, right? In case you didn't know, you don't get extra performance from putting your games on an SSD. You get faster load times in your games, and again, faster boot times. Overall, just a faster system. The 9700, once again, here we go. 8 cores, 3 gigahertz base, 4.7 gigahertz max turbo. The ninth gen i7 came at a weird time when the 9900K dropped. But if you want, if you really don't need hyperthreading, but you do want those cores, 9700 is an option for you. If you want to overclock, then you would want to go with the 9700K. That's an overclockable CPU, right? So, yeah, this pre-built's not that bad. But let's say you want to go over $1,000, right? Let's say you still don't want to build. You want a system that you expect to run all the games you wanted to run, stream at the same time, 1080p high fidelity. Well, you're you're going to pay a little bit for a system like that. But let's say you're at the $1,200 range and you want said system. The biggest boost going from that, the one we just looked at, that was $1,000. This one's $1,200. This is all USD. But the biggest jump is you're going from, what was it, a 1660 Ti to an RTX 2070. A graphics card that's an 8 gigabyte graphics card. So you have ray tracing, DLSS, I believe. Well, no, I could be wrong. I have to fact check that. But it's a still very much a decent card. Yes, you would be able to game at 1440p with this graphics card, which is ironically not not mentioned here. But speaking of mention, it is good to mention that the stigma with going with pre-builds is that the power supplies aren't as robust as they should be. From my studies is most, or from my observations, most of them come with 80 plus certified, about 500 watts. What that means is you can expect about 80% efficiency at 50% load, something to that extent. And no, they're not necessarily terrible, but you do want to try to get one that's at least 80 plus certified. This one doesn't list if it's bronze or gold, but given that you're paying over $1,200, if you're not building, this is something this should concern you. This is something that should concern you. Why? Because say you want to upgrade or you want to overclock, 500 watts might not be enough. If you were building, you could get a much better power supply unit for this money and similar parts because RTX 2070, which I mean, retailers should be getting ready to fire sale 20 series RTX graphics cards, especially here soon, especially with that Nvidia announcement coming at the end of this month. But this is a $400 graphics card, between a $400 to $500 graphics card, $175 CPU, depending on where you get it from, and it has a B450 motherboard. I like the B450s. I had a ASRock B450 motherboard. I wouldn't recommend it. I'd say go with like a gigabyte B450 motherboard. That is, this price is high. You would even expect at least an X370 motherboard. Say at least an X370 motherboard. Given that we're just over $1,000. Why an X470 motherboard? You're going to get better VRMs, better thermals, better overclocking results. I mean, they're still a viable option. But at this price point, that's difficult. That's difficult. But again, if you don't want to build, you do have this option. It's quite expensive. And then one other pre-built that I found interesting is this one here. This one's $1,400. And this is kind of like the cream of the crop here when it comes to pre-built as far as specs and what you're going to get. Why? Well, for starters, it has the fastest CPU, the 3700X. This is an 8-core, 16-thread CPU. So it has SMT, simultaneously multi-threading, hyper-threading. But we're dropping down, or maybe not even really dropping down, right? Because the other one had an RTX 2070, 8 gigabytes. This is an RTX 2060 Super. They're going to be very close. It's much like when Nvidia dropped the GTX 1070 and the 1070 Ti. Very similar. I mean, they're going to be very close within margin, but we went up so much, like what, $200? We went up about 300 bucks, $200. Told you guys, math. I say go ahead and laugh. Math, I'm not good at math. But we went up $200, and we did get a faster CPU, better CPU, but we also got a slight downgrade. Still 16 gigabytes of RAM, but here's what I like the most about this pre-build. And that's the not what I like the most about it, but 1 terabyte SSD. That's pretty awesome. I mean, that's good. When you're going with the single storage solution, when you can, and when you can afford, you kind of want to go with the highest possible. The highest possible. That's why when you're going with the single storage solution, I say I don't recommend going with a single 240. I recommend you go with at least a single 500. Put money towards that with your build to get the larger SSD. 16 gigabytes of RAM, 3000 megahertz, that's good. Something we talked about in the DDR4 XMP video. Again, you can find that video down in the basement, but you want fast RAM when you're running Ryzen. I mean, arguably you can go, I mean, 3700X can support DDR4 speeds past 3000 megahertz. Zen, OG Zen Plus struggled with really anything past 29, 33 megahertz, at least from my experience. But depending on the motherboard and how comfortable you are with tweaking the timings, you could have got faster DDR4 speeds. But 2666 megahertz and 2933 megahertz, from what I saw, was the sweet spot with Zen and Zen 2. But 3000 megahertz, I am not a fan of the case. I don't think it has good airflow here in the front. So in my opinion, you want cold air to come to the front of the case, through the case, and out through the back. This isn't going to be enough to cool your parts, right? It also depends on the GPU, but we don't know. As you can see here, it says brand may vary. So you don't know if you're getting a reference, you don't know if you're getting an MSI, you don't know what kind of cooler it's going to have. So that's something that you should take into consideration, and that will be your internal components temperatures. So your CPU temperature, your GPU temperature, things of that nature. You're going to want to pay attention to those things. But case aside, which I don't really, it has. I do like the front panel. I will say how you can change the RGB right there. It's pretty interesting. USB 3.0 headers in the front, and I like the mesh here is open in the front, but the 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 top, not the front. Sorry, but the front panel here is just there's not going to be. It just looks and feels restrictive. It's just not going to it's not going to have enough airflow to your GPU, to your CPU. You want to get that hot air out of there, but you also want to introduce fresh, cool air too, because the system's going to be dependent on the ambient temperatures wherever your system is. The system will get as hot as the air around it. So it's something to keep in mind. You want a case that's going to promote good airflow. This completely cuts it off Because looking at, say, the $749 system, which I thought was the most robust, the front panel here has space for air to flow right through the sides. Yeah, it's blocked off in the front, but at least you have these two airways right here where air can openly flow. Not openly, but can kind of bottleneck and flow right through there and into the system and right on out. Plus, I like this case a little better than this one here. I mean, for the price, it's $1,400. The case, if you were to build a $1,400 system, if you were to build a $1,400 system, you'd be surprised at some of the parts you could put together in a system. I mean, you are up there and say like RTX 2060 territory, sure, maybe even RTX 2080. If you want to hold out and see what see what Nvidia is going to release and what performance you can expect. If you want to hold out, sure, go for it. But those cards are going to be hard to find. Nvidia is not releasing the lower tier cards first. They are likely going to stick to releasing, say, the RTX 3080 and RTX 3090 Ti, or if it's not a Ti, who knows? The RTX 3090 and the RTX 3080. They're likely going to release those first. The budget-friendly cards like the 2060s of the bunch and the 1650s, things like that, we won't see those for quite a while. Do you really want to wait? If you had this much money, cash money, would you really want to wait? You could still very much buy this PC, upgrade down the road again. You could even flip your RTX 2060 Super on the used market if you're comfortable and install a newer GPU. Even upgrade to, say, an RTX 3070. That would be a great upgrade actually. Theoretically, because we don't know what to expect with the performance, but given how each NVIDIA card normally leapfrogs the next each generation, you can expect a pretty good performance boost going from an RTX 2060 to an RTX 3070. So I like this pre-built. Specs wise, again, it has the fastest possible CPU you can get for gaming and streaming, and this 8-core 16-thread CPU is going to be phenomenal for your content creation workflow, right? It has a base frequency of 3.6, but with the proper cooling, depending on the motherboard, if you're like on an X570 motherboard or an X470 motherboard, you could get this CPU 4.2, 4.3 all cores maybe. Easy. Not easy, but it can do it. I say it's easy, like, yeah, sure. No, it's not. It's still very much, full disclaimer, it's still very much a silicone lottery. There's no guarantee, but if the conditions are there, you have that possibility of running this 8-core CPU at least at 4.1, 4.2 gigahertz all core. And that's going to give you an incredible boost in gaming. Incredible. Maybe not great, or maybe not incredible. Great. But nonetheless, you'll get a boost in performance and render times, all those things. So I do like this in terms of specs, right? I mean, if you're that high up, if you're over, 12, $1,300, and you're flirting past that 15, which even then, if you're that high, I strongly recommend you go and build yourself. We have a lot of videos on the channel. If you're new here and you're just watching this live stream on the replay, or you're here live with us right now, if you have that much money, build your system. You're going to get a much better system in terms of configuration, right? In terms of case, power supply, sleeving. You can pick your own graphics card. All of those things. If you have that much money disposable, consider building. Now, if you can't build, again, that's perfectly fine too. And I know I said we saved a bonus here because while you can have this same approach on, say, if you're shopping on eBay, it's just Amazon offers free shipping on a lot of these pre-builds, as you can see here. If we quickly go back and just scan over SkyTech, free shipping. That's very important because to ship a PC, it's not cheap, y'all. It's not cheap at all to ship a PC. For one, they're heavy. And two, you want to make sure you have the right insurance. And three, it has to be packaged correctly, right? But SkyTech, they're going to offer you free shipping. That's going to save you a lot of money within itself. And all of these pre-builds, free shipping, free shipping, free shipping, free shipping. That might not be the case on eBay, or it may be the case on eBay, right? But for the most part, you're going to save some money going to pre-builds, or I'm sorry, with free shopping on the pre-build. But let's say you want an alternative approach and you don't want to build, right? Let's say you want to be able to configure. Let's say you want to pick your parts. You don't know anybody local you can trust. You want to trust a reputable brand. Well, there is another option for you that I'm going to share with you now before we dock the boat. That is going with NZXT's BLD service, which I'm going to assume is just a build or a play on build, but they're not sponsors of this video. NZXT are not sponsors of the channel. I just find that their BLD service is one of the most flexible and robust options you can come across and choose from. Most importantly, because the way they literally get you started. So let's get started real quick and walk through how NZXT lets you configure your system. I did a poll on the community tab of asked the community what was your resolution that you played at. Almost everybody said 1080p, which if you're not subscribed to me, I welcome that you do subscribe to me. We have weekly videos, and here coming up, we're doing weekly live streams. But this is an option that is going to be suitable for most people, and one that I admire the most. But our community tab, we did a poll, and we asked the community, what was your resolution? It was without a doubt almost unanimously 1080p. So that's what we're going to configure with NZXT's BLD service is a 1080p system. You can switch to 1440p. That's personally one of my favorite resolutions. Which, spoiler alert, next week's video on demand or VOD, this week's upload is we're talking resolutions and it's going to be fun. So please definitely get subscribed. If you don't have the notification bell turned on, it's the little icon next to subscribe. It really tells YouTube that you like the content and you want to be notified when it goes live, because the truth is they don't push it out to all of the subscribers. So by doing that, you really help me grow here on the platform. So be sure to get subscribed if you're not already, and definitely click that notification bell so you can catch that video the moment it drops. But we are going to be talking resolutions. Here today, we're talking 1080p, 1920 by 1080p. To keep it simple, right? The KISS, let's keep it simple. We'll say it's 60 hertz. So our monitor, 1920 by 1080p, 60 hertz. That's pretty standard. Of course, if you know, you've been around the channel long enough, you know we've been testing. Obviously, Fortnite. Is it dying? Is it alive? Apple and Epic, with a little bit of Google, are now in this heated debate. Let them hash it out. If you play Fortnite competitively, chances are you're playing on the PC. And if you're not, strongly consider moving your content workflow off of mobile and to a PC, just in case, or whatever the outcome between Epic and Apple and Google Play, you want to be prepared to continue creating your content. And if it's not going to be for mobile, I strongly recommend it be for PC. You can do it for console. I mean, consoles have a purpose, but PCs have character. You can do it for a console. Strongly consider moving your mobile workflow off of, um, or moving your mobile Fortnite workflow, say off of your iPhone or iPad and to a computer. So we test Fortnite around here. Call of Duty Modern Warfare getting really popular these days, really popular. And let's switch back to our training scene. Sorry about that. But we have Fortnite selected. We have Call of Duty Warzone selected. We're at 1080p. Again, you can go to 1440. I don't know if you guys could see that, but you can go to 1440p if you want. But we're going to stick to 1080p. That's what everybody loves. We test Fortnite. We test Call of Duty. I just introduced Apex back into the benchmark workload, but I say let's pick a slight graphically demanding game, right? So let's go with Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which you will see and you will see coming up in some of our benchmarks. I will be benchmarking Assassin's Creed Odyssey indefinitely. So here's the interesting part, right? This is where it gets really interesting. Full disclaimer, I cannot confirm or deny NZXT's metrics, but it is important to note that they tell you that it's measured in each game's highest graphics setting. That's important. I don't always test in the highest graphics setting. It depends on the graphics card. Sometimes, I mean, there are VRAM limitations. So there's only so many graphics you could turn up depending on the game. If you're like sub 4 GB, six you should be able to turn up most settings, but 4 you're kind of limited to VRAM. But NZXT tells you that this is what's recommended for your price point. So in this case, I'm going to go, let's say we want to build our own, or since we were just looking at close about a $1,400 PC, or better yet, an $899 PC, because we were looking at a pre-built over on Amazon. That was that price point. But this is an $899 PC. They say in NZXT says starter PC. You can pick your case color. Dropping down here, you can pick your parts. You can pick. I'm sorry, not. We'll get to that in a second. You can't pick your parts on their pre-built option. This is their pre-built option, and it tells you here. This is interesting. 38 FPS. That's with everything turned up high. So if you adjust some settings, you can get much better FPS in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, like much better FPS. But Call of Duty Modern Warfare, that's not that bad. Maybe you want a game on 120 hertz monitor down the road. You could lower a lot of settings in Modern Warfare and get close to that 120 um, hertz target. And the same can be said with Fortnite. As I run Fortnite at competitive settings, I turn the view distance to epic, models and textures to about medium, and everything else is set to low. And that's at 1080p. But looking at the graphics, you have a 1660 Super and a Core Intel i5 9400F. So it's a 6 core with no integrated graphics. One thing I fully respect is the 16 gigabytes of RAM, right? And the fact that you get a 512 gigabyte SSD. Kudos to NZXT because looking over at our pre-built on Amazon, that was at that $899 price point. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Okay, I believe it was here, and then we upgraded to. Oh no, let's go back to 749. Here we go. $899 pre-built on Amazon. It's a Ryzen 5 2600 6 core and a 1660 Super 60 gigabyte, 500 gigabyte SSD, 16 gigabytes of DDR4. It's actually very similar to this PC here. Very, very similar, minus the obvious difference that is the platform, the CPU and motherboard platform. It's an Intel on a B365 motherboard and a Core i5 9400F. So it's 6 cores, 6 threads. No hyperthreading. Maybe you don't need hyperthreading. Maybe you don't want hyperthreading. Maybe you want something that could enable you to game and stream at the same time, right? Going with Intel i5 9400F, well, I tell you what, you'll get a good single core, you'll get good single core performance, right? So you'll get a good gaming CPU, but streaming and other tasks may prove to be difficult. Joseph Moses, welcome. Welcome, brother. I don't think I've seen you around the channel. Welcome to the live stream. He says, very good info for us. Thanks. You're certainly welcome. I appreciate you being here. Welcome, welcome to the live stream. Yeah, we've been dropping some very interesting nuggets here. I also want to point out that the power supply, 500 watts, it's rated bronze, so you'll have about 450 watts available at max load, somewhere around there. Still not bad, right? Because This system, you won't need to overclock. You can't anyway. You're gonna have to rely on Intel's boost on the 9400 and the GPU, which you could overclock. You likely wouldn't get that much boost in performance if you did, but you could. We overclocked the 1650 Super here in the recent video, and again, you can find that description. That description, you can find that video in the basement or the description box down below. You can check it out after this live event ends, and let me know what you thought about the overclocking process in that video because we did overclock the 1650 Super, and depending on the game, we saw moderate boost, moderate boost. But it was fun doing it either way. We managed to get it to, I believe it was 2115 megahertz, so 2115 megahertz, just a little over 2.1 gigahertz. But this is their $899 pre-build. You can pick their from a white case to a black case, starter PC, starter plus PC, with the plus PC being, I really don't see that big of a difference between the plus. Let's see. I mean, same power supply, bronze, same CPU, 9400F, 6 core, same GPU, and it's $100 more. Maybe the case is different. No, same case. All right, no front panel, or I'm sorry, no mesh in the front. So I'll tell you what. Let's say you wanted to configure your own. Here's why I really am a fan of the BLD service. That is, you can pick certain parts. So going back to our Amazon pre-builds we were looking at, there was 1,000. Let's say we go with $1,000 because that's pretty medium, and that's a bill we were looking at on the Amazon pre-builds. Right, we were hovering around $1,000. Let's once again quickly look at what $1,000 pre-built on Amazon will get us. Intel. Let's see if did we pick one? Yeah, Intel. So we have a 9700F. So in a 1660 Ti, 6 gigabytes, 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is good. 240 gigabyte SSD, 1 terabyte hard drive, 2 storage solution, SSD hard drive. I can't recommend that enough. Either go with one large single storage solution, almost always an SSD. If you can't afford an SSD and a higher storage limitation, then go with a hybrid two storage system. That is, I'm sorry, two storage solution. That is 240 gigabyte SSD at the minimum, and at least a 1 terabyte HD mechanical spinner. 500 gigabytes is not enough for a mechanical spinner. Just don't. Especially for a gaming PC. If it was an office PC or a school PC, absolutely, that'd be more than enough. But for a gaming PC, that's just not going to cut it, Chief. But this is where we at with $1,000. Ninth generation 8 core i7 and a 1660 Ti. So let's go over to NZXT. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Tell us where you are in the world. Tell us where you're watching from. I love to know. But we're starting with $1,000 because if I got $1,000 cash money in the bank right now, and I want a PC right now, right? I want a PC right now. I'm gonna start here. So let's start with our $1,000 and configure everything from there, right? And we're starting with the same CPU. That's a 9700F. Going over here to our CPU. 9700F. What are our options? We have a Core i5 10th generation 6-core CPU, which would lower the price by a little over $140. A 10700K, which would be plus 80. But we got to get this down to $1,000. We got to match in terms of at least similar specs to our Amazon, and it looks like it's an iBuyPower PC. We got to match similar to what's over there. That is with the i7 9700F. Let's go over to our motherboard. So we don't have the option of the, I believe this will, it doesn't tell us. Okay. So we're going to go with a Z390, which is already selected. So we'll go with what NZXT recommends. Let's go over to our GPU. We need to cut costs somewhere. We are way over what our iBuyPower PC costs. Right? This right here, which teaser, you might recognize it from uh the image that's on this thumbnail, but we need to match this price here, this $1,000 PC here. And going over to NZXT, we have the 1660 Ti. We really can't go any lower, right? We can't go any lower. And that's one of the downsides that I quickly want to mention with NZXT's BLD services. You're still almost very limited to the parts you can pick. You have more options, or you have options in general, which is still very much a good thing. But you have a certain price category that you have to stay in, which the lowest we can go is a 1660 Ti, which again is fine because that's what's on our Amazon iBuyPower PC, 1660 Ti, 16 gigabytes of memory. So that's what we're going to go with for this build, right? 1660 Ti, i7 9700F. Our power supply, again, we can't go much lower than we're already at the lowest of lowest we can go, which is in the XT 650 watt 80 plus gold rating power supply unit. So that's a phenomenal power supply and almost worth paying that extra money. It's going to be a good investment for you down the road if you want to upgrade some of your parts. It's going to be a good investment there, and it's the lowest we can go. So we're going to have to stick with it. Let's go over to storage. So here we have option of adding a 1 terabyte hard drive because that's what's in our Amazon iBuyPower PC, and then our SSD, which 240, which we can't really, I mean, 250, 240, same difference, right? Because this one's 240, but it's going to reserve 10 of that anyway. So we're looking at 250 gigabyte SSD and a 1 terabyte hard drive. We're at $1,400. Cooling. Here's the thing with the iBuyPower PC. We're going to assume that the CPU comes on an air cooler because it doesn't tell us otherwise. And it looks like this could or could not be the air cooler you would get with this system. Much like the other pre-builds, they tell you that the brand may vary. So the air cooler may vary to what you get. But let's switch from this 120 millimeter AIO all-in-one liquid cooler just to be quiet's Pure Rock Slim. And well, that's interesting. They tell us that the cooler is not sufficient for the CPU. We have to go with an AIO. Hmm, that's debatable. That's debatable. It should be, especially since you're not overclocking. But they want to upsell you into their products. That is the NZXT Crankin M22 120 millimeter AIO, which is fine. That's fine. But maybe you don't want a liquid cooler. You're going to benefit from noise and better temperatures, and definitely water moves heat more efficiently than air. So that's going to be a good thing, but you're going to pay for it, right? I am a fan of all-in-one liquid coolers or AIOs. I am a fan of them. Why? Because I also overclock, and to overclock requires, the ability to get the heat off of the IHS as efficiently as possible to keep the CPU cool so that it can sustain the overclock. You don't want thermal throttling or you don't want diminishing returns because the CPU is essentially too hot for the load and the cooling is just not adequate enough to keep the CPU at a respectable temperature. AIOs help. Going with a closed loop cooler is the good, better, best solution. I hear soon I will do a spoiler alert. I am planning to do a water cooled build. I just haven't decided, say, on like platform and hard twos versus soft. I know hard is pretty much what's expected in the community, but I haven't decided on that exactly. I do know I would like for it to be in a large form factor case. That way it can be a multi-system, or two systems in one. We're also going to wait to maybe we relocate the lab to do that as well. So a little bit more spoiler alerts. But I am a fan of water cooling because it also helps with overclocking. It's so much better with noise and things of that nature. Yeah, you do have the risk of leaks, but I haven't had any leaks from any of my AIOs. I mean, your closed loop on a closed loop, you can experience leaks as well, but it is something to just be consciously aware of when you're running an AIO is leaks. Some things you can look out for is, for one, if you have like high temperature spikes, or your system is crashing, or your GPU is overheating, and you're running like a utility like MSI Afterburner, and NZXT has one too, Camlink, or not Camlink, it's called something. I can't remember. If you're running it, let me know in the chat. But NZXT has a utility as well where you can monitor your temperatures. But if you see spikes, chances are your pump is failing or has failed, or you are experiencing a leak somewhere. And that's just something you look at by the pump and by any tubes. Do you see any kind of coloration, any kind of liquid? If your system is off and it leaks and you catch it, you might be able to salvage your part. So that's just something you're just consciously aware of when you have water flowing in your system. But I like overclocking and I like AIOs. They are a little costly, so that's just something to consider. And we're going with a single 120 millimeter AIO, so that means a single 120 millimeter fan on the radiator. You do have your 280 millimeter options, so that's two 140 millimeter fans. Okay, and then you have the cranking with the LCD display, which that must be really really cool. And then you have a 360 millimeter AIO, which means three 120 millimeter fans. But for this build, we have to go with the 120 millimeters because we're way over our budget, and it doesn't look like we're getting under anytime soon. We'd have to change some of the parts to get under, but we were trying to build a system that was similarly close to this iBuyPower gaming PC, $4,000 with free shipping. If we jump over to NZXT's Let's Build, you'll see we're $400 over that, and we have some of the same parts we have in our iBuyPower pre-built on Amazon. A 1 terabyte hard drive, 250 gigabyte SSD, 1660 Ti, which we would know the brand is Zotac, and same CPU, i7-9700F. The motherboard could be different. It is a Z390 motherboard, ASRock Pro. Our RAM, still very much 16 gigabytes, Gamix. Our power supply, 650 gold, so it is about 150 watts more than our iBuyPower PC. But that's a good thing. And the RAM is a little faster. This is 2666 RAM. And this is 3000 megahertz RAM. So it's a little faster. We don't know the timings, the cache latency. But everything else is the same. You get a better case, in my opinion. Like, there's nothing wrong with this iBuyPower case, minus the fact that the front is completely blocked off. Your airflow is going to be extremely limited, if any at all. Not this concerns me, right? You go here with our NZXT case, you have at zero extra added cost, you can go with the 210, which okay, they're mini ITX. So you want to stay with the 510i, which not anymore. Again, it has a closed off panel, but much better than this all tempered glass here, which is just going to just cook your parts. And you would have an AIO. So you wouldn't have as much heat. Your real big heat generators would be your graphics card, right? That'd be your biggest heat generator. But still, the downside here is the cost. We're at $1,318, about $319 over for my iBuyPower PC, which comes with a keyboard and mouse. Much better case, sure, but you're going to pay, I mean, you're paying an extra $319 for a similar PC over here on iBuyPower. The only good thing is going with BLD, going with NZXT's BLD is you can pick some of your parts. If you have higher money, we were looking at a build that was like $1,400 on Amazon. This one here, but the 2060 Super and then 3700X. 3700X is going to have hyper threading or SMT. You would have to go to a 10700K to get a similar base CPU. And at that point, you're way over even the $1,400 mark. And you haven't even upgraded to a similar GPU yet. That would be the RTX 2060 Super. All right, and look at that. We're almost $700 over. Or I'm sorry, $700 from our $1,000 PC. $300 over. A little over $300 over our NZXT build. So you have to ask yourself, is paying that extra really worth it? Or should I build my own gaming PC? And now you do have other options, which we could possibly share in an upcoming live stream. But, docking the boat here, we looked at some pretty good pre-builds from a wide range category, a wide price category, all the way down from $649 all the way up to $1,400. Those are pre-builds on Amazon. You can shop on eBay. My recommendation is that you pick a pre-built gaming PC with the fastest possible gaming CPU. Don't skimp there. That's going to be the one of the most challenging parts to upgrade because you're not making the choice on motherboard. Now, speaking of choice, my best recommendation is that you build your system, build your gaming PC. If you had $1,600 like we were looking at with the NZXT build, if you had $1,600, you could build a system almost 2080 Ti level of performance. Almost, because that's a $1,200 graphics card and $400 wouldn't really do much for you between RAM, CPU, motherboard, power supply, all the other main parts you would need. You would still be, you would still be at a deficit, you'd be at a loss. You could maybe look at the RTX 2080 or maybe a 2080 Super, which is about an 749 to $800 graphics card, somewhere in between there, at that price point. And you could still go with Intel if you wanted, or go with AMD and pass off those savings that you would get from the platform change to say getting more RAM, going from 16 gigabytes to level up your stream and go to 32 gigabytes, or get a better single solution storage. So say if you from a 500 gigabyte SSD to a 1 terabyte SSD, or you can really level up your system and get a 240 gigabyte M.2 NVMe SSD. It's non-volatile memory, so you'll get even faster read and write times. And then go with a 500 gigabyte SSD for some of your core games. Don't go with the mechanical drive at all, just an overall fast system. I've run a similar setup with the X470 test bed you gents and gals been seeing in some of the latest videos. And it's just an overall fast, incredible experience. No, I don't have time to look at the load times in between the game changing scenes, what have you, when I'm benchmarking. It's just really fast. It boots really fast. You will benefit greatly from upgrading your SSD. So we're going to go ahead and pull up and dock the boat. If you have any questions for me before we check out of here, please drop them down in the comment section. I will do my best to answer them for you. I appreciate everybody coming out and hanging with us during this weekly live stream. You may see me experimenting with the times here as I try to see what's a good time to optimize the viewership. Is that in the morning time? Is that in the nighttime? Is it in the between time? Somewhere between there. But I do appreciate you all hanging out with me here, and I really hope to see you on the next one. So until then, be easy.